This is Office Hours,
the show for sharing experiences and stories in governance, risk management, and compliance.
Cyber criminals aren't just targeting random individuals for credit card info. CEOs in big companies like Sony, Facebook, and Google have all been duped. And, of course,
the Russian government hackers penetrated the computer network of the Democratic National Committee.
WikiLeaks just recently published a bunch of these emails.
So, Corey, I recently I was told by IT I got an award for the past quarter. I turned in more emails. I sent in more emails to our suspected phishing address than anybody in the company.
Very good. I've only done it twice, but I got both of them, and they gave me 100% on my score. So
I must look entirely more hackable than you do.
Maybe it's just the profile.
Socially easily manipulated.
Yeah, that's it.
So this is Corey McBain. Thanks for coming, Corey. He's a product designer here at ACL. What are you going to tell us about today?
I am going to tell you about phishing attacks and governance on the front line. So how can organizations provide accountability around controls, IT cybersecurity risks and controls, how they can provide the right information at the right time, and how organizations can get accountability out of their frontline operators.
Yeah, so I think I'm interested in this because we've been at ACL. We've been toying with this notion of something we call control performance for really probably 6 or 8 months now. This will be an interesting case where perhaps it's high enough risk to take this idea of control performance. How do we enforce action on the front line so the business manages its own governance rather than having to go do audits after the fact?
Exactly. And how can we use what we're finding out through the control performance exercise? How can we use that to automate outcomes throughout the business?
Great.
Okay. Let's talk about a problem. I think in the clip that we opened up with, a lot of these emails were shown in that, or a couple of them were shown in the example of what a phishing email is. And this is a fact of life now. Every year, phishing examples are growing. They're getting more pervasive. They're getting better. This one in the front actually scares me the most because it's targeted to an actual physical person. It has personal information about that person, and it's asking for very, very personal stuff that can be used to exploit pretty much whatever.
This totally happened to my boss, our CEO, and you know how she caught it? I'm embarrassed to say. There was a phishing email sent to her that was meant to look like it was from me.
Yes.
And it said, "Lori, please see the attached financial forecast." The email was perfect, except for then she immediately slacks me and says, "I know this was phishing. You know why? Because never in your life have you sent me a financial forecast."
Exactly. If it was an expense report, then I got you. So again, famously, we saw some examples in the video starting up. So one of the main combatants against this is IT policy and enforcement and skills training and education. But according to IASCA of a couple of years ago, they did a study. 83% of global organizations are viewing cyber attacks as one of the top 3 risks to their business, and 38% feel prepared for a sophisticated attack. Not a good ratio. 86% of those same companies see cybersecurity skills shortage as a major risk, and people are falling for it everywhere. People will choose a faster connection over a more secure internet connection, which opens you up to a number of threats. And 1 in 5 people already, these are employees that work at your company, have fallen prey to a phishing attack. So problem is real. It's out there. Orgs can have the best IT security platforms. They can have the most hardened security. But once someone has your credentials or an email, they can hack whatever they need. They can get whatever information they need, and it's pretty much game over. And that was evidenced today by Reddit's 2-factor authentication hack that happened. They didn't get really detailed stuff, but they got in, and
it's clearly happening to everybody. But I see folks looking for solutions and looking for people and whatever to solve these problems. But I feel like, back to the original topic here, what we need some kind of model or framework that's a bit more than just what's technology, what's the policy. And I think this idea of control performance and managing control performance is that.
Absolutely. And again, around the controls, you can have the best written controls in the world. They can be extremely concise and elegant, but if you're not actually sure they're being performed, if there's no accountability around them, then how can you be sure that they're actually mitigating the risk before you're audited, before the tests occur? So let's talk about the case. So we had a case come through around a U.S.-based university with approximately 1,200 employees. They were concerned with their exposure to attacks, essentially by phishing, by spear phishing, any other kind of credential theft. They have a skilled, strong IT department with an emerging cybersecurity training initiative, and they have strong internal controls. So they seem like a perfect candidate. So what did they want? They wanted accountability around performance of controls, and they wanted to prove it. They wanted to prove that those controls were being executed with that accountability.
That's not an especially big that's not 1,200 employees. That's not an especially large organization.
No.
So what that means is, as is the case for everybody, Shirley has limited resources. And so I don't know if I'm interpreting this right, because I wasn't involved at all in this particular job we were working on. Mm-hmm. But is the reality that it's an organization of that size can't do the audits, can't do enough going and checking on people to where they were sort of pushed into what's a more automated way to make sure that those things, we've gone through the trouble to define controls.
Right.
How do we make sure they're followed if we don't have the resources to constantly babysit people?
Exactly. If you're in a small audit shop, you're babysitting those people to make sure that they are receiving the training or getting the skills that they need isn't necessarily your job.
So out of 1,200 employees, there's probably not a huge information security organization either.
Nope.
So it's probably a CISO and maybe a staff, if you're lucky, a couple of staff.
Couple of people.
I'm just guessing by the size.
Yeah.
Probably all they can do to write and manage the policies. Now let's look for automation to make sure that they're followed.
Exactly.
Okay.
And beyond that, they wanted to automate outcomes. So how can I, and we'll get into this when we talk about what our solution was, automate those outcomes, those control test results, the risk factors. Can I illuminate my risk getting greater, my risk scores going up because things aren't done? How do we solve that?
Okay.
So our solution base here. So it's threefold. We wanted to define a control performance program around training, IT efforts around email, communications, cybersecurity skills building. So those programs are already in place. We want to make sure that they're being followed and completed on a timely basis. So the control, again, could be a weekly, can be a monthly, a quarterly, a yearly control, whatever the frequency is. We want to design a schedule of control performance that coincides.
But so in this case, this was a control that said on some periodic basis, conduct some kind of education with
some kind of training and ensure the training is complete with all the people that have access to the system.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Secondly, we wanted to define and set meaningful metrics. So based on the answers that we were getting from our front lines, where are the no's happening? We'll get into that in the demo. And then we wanted to automate the outcomes. So we're going to take a quick look at a control, and we're going to show where control performance gets enabled. So what is control performance? I'm glad you asked that, Dan.
Corey, what's control performance?
Well, if I have a control that has to be executed or performed on a certain frequency, I can set up a control performance schedule to ensure that whatever action or control task that I have to have for that control gets performed on that schedule.
Okay, so to go back to our phishing example for continuity purposes, we all know we have a phishing problem. The control to avoid getting caught by phishing is there's probably some technical controls first of all, but in this case we're talking about there's also a periodic training reminder to every employee about what phishing looks like and how to avoid it.
Right.
So there's one control, but that needs to be performed 1,200 times is
Yes.
what I hear you saying.
Depending on who's got access to that system, it might be 100 times, depending on the system.
Okay,
it could be, if it's the email system, then we'll probably want 1,200 responses saying, yes, I completed the training.
Okay.
So then we can say, everybody's completed the training. This control is correct, it passes. Right?
Understood.
So what we can see here on the screen is, the control performance, the results of the control performance. So as people are filling out the surveys, and you'll see it's only my name in here right now. Very nice. But as people are filling out these surveys or questionnaires, I'm logging it. I can see what's happening, who's filling out what, and what their responses are.
So the instance of a control is Dan takes his training. That training was an email with a questionnaire that said, did you read this? Do you understand?
Yeah.
If an email comes from this, does it look like phishing? Yes or no? Whatever, some kind of quiz, whatever it is.
My example is way less detailed, but their example would be more detailed. And, we would ask questions based on the training. If you wanted to verify that it had been done, if you wanted that extra step of verification, you could do that.
Sure. Okay. And so every instance of that control occurring is being automatically pushed out,
Right.
so that the control is in fact forced.
Right.
That's what we call control performance.
Exactly. Well stated. And
Okay.
and on a schedule. So if this control is to be performed, in this case, let's say yearly, because we want to make sure employees are refreshed yearly or when they join, we'll have either a couple different schedules, one yearly for everybody or one on as it occurs for new employees joining. Make
Right.
sure that you've completed the training and that you understand it. Right. So, making sense?
It's making sense.
Okay.
Those what you've called on the screen there is a control task.
Yes.
Essentially says we have a record of each time that it should be done, and now I would know if it hadn't been done.
Exactly.
So I'm not chasing people down. I'm not doing audits after the fact a year later to see did we do our IT security training.
Exactly. And you can see all of these are complete because I was good and submitted them all. But if they're not submitted, or if they're overdue, or if they're in progress, or we don't know where they're, we have different statuses to track that. So if somebody is late, waiting, unsure of what to do next, you can identify them and track them down.
Okay.
Yeah. So as these control tasks come in, they get collected in ACL's results module. So what you can see here is all of those control tasks that were nicely displayed in the UI in the projects module. Here they are as data on the back end. So I'm looking at all of the records here that have come in, and what I care about is one question. The answer to one question. So what I'm doing is I'm analyzing the responses in this one field as users are filling them out. And what I'm doing is setting a metric on that. So I'm watching that field and I'm looking for a value. I'm looking for a value of no, and I'm looking for a percentage of my overall total. So there's a metric there that now lives and is always watching that column. So as answers come in and as people answer no or yes,
Haven't done it,
I can chase them down. But if they're answering that they didn't get it, they didn't pass it, they didn't understand it, I can track that.
Yeah.
And what I can do from there is to automate the outcome, which was the third piece we wanted to do here. So looking at the risk. So the way I've interpreted this, the way the customer interpreted this, was as I'm sending out control tasks by control performance for my frontline people, as I'm getting answers from them, I want to use those answers that I get from them to inform the outcome of my risk score. It could be a control test. You can automate a few different fields in the system.
So that feeding it back into risk is one thing, but if nothing else, we've established a control. Now we have a metric that's kind of a key control indicator, as it were, and we ought to trend along at 100% of our IT security training has happened.
Exactly.
Or, if not, control is now failing.
Yep.
Escalate that to the CISO. Perhaps we actually have an IT incident on our hands.
Absolutely.
If that were the case.
Yep.
Now, so that is completely automated, and you no longer need to test, audit, whatever. That just happens in real time.
Exactly. That metric I showed you here is linked here, and it's used to automate. Again, in this case, I am feeding it back into the risk.
Right, which could be another step is now over time. I may also feed the same data to say, how do we rate particular risks?
Exactly.
Okay.
So what I'm looking at here is if I've got less than 10% of the overall sample that's coming back as the answer no, then I'm going to leave this at a low risk because most of my people have it. Of course, your mileage may vary. You can put in whatever thresholds you want to trigger that risk. But as you can see today, 100% came in as no. So of course I'm going to drop this up to high. I could also fail the control. And again, with other instances where we can tie these things together, we could fail the control, we can drive the risk score up, we can affect compliance in a way up or down. So if I'm mapping controls to compliance requirements, right, in a totally separate thing, I can use the outcomes of those automated outcomes through metrics to drive up or down my compliance assurance. So if I'm looking at SOC 2 and this control is related to something there, to a requirement in some other regulation, if it fails, I can always knock that out of compliance now. So now I'm out of SOC 2 compliance because people aren't doing the training. So the entire thing, we can draw a line pretty much anywhere within the organization using this.
That is interesting. So that's a lot to take in.
Yeah, sorry.
A lot to take in, but at the same time, I think the idea here is that going back to the university you worked with, it sounds like what we've put in place in that university is a way to say, we've set this up one time. Now it sits and watches and self-risk manages, self-corrects, self-governs, self-operates our risk management program. And that's because we were able to push the performance and the tracking of controls out to the front line.
Exactly.
And that's control performance.
And that's the power of control performance.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's excellent. I think that, and they did it to solve their phishing problem.
Exactly.
Now, what if I said, okay, now they have another control that says every time somebody leaves the company, they get removed from Active Directory so that their access is removed from key systems.
Right. So that's an as required, right? So that's triggered on an event base. So you've got somebody looking in your internal org trying to trigger that control manually.
But I could do the same thing.
Yeah.
Monitor the payroll.
Yes.
To say, because guess what? We never forget to cut somebody off a payroll. Monitor the payroll and say, this person has been marked as being terminated in the HR system.
Yep.
Please eliminate their access right now. If not, continue to escalate until you've failed the control, because too many people still have access or still haven't been removed from the system. Exactly. Yeah.
So there's another layer of automation there that you can add. So I think that's a.
Or I could dial down my risk of overspending on our travel and entertainment budget because I have pushed to the expense program manager the responsibility to review everything that was identified as a split transaction or that was higher than the policy amount as it occurs.
Exactly.
So never again do I need to go back and audit that control.
Exactly. Self-auditing controls. So what we learned are there's no silver bullet to eliminate cybersecurity risk. It's always going to happen. Efforts are going to get more elaborate and better. But however, orgs can ensure that policies are enforced by their frontline teams, using the cases that we've just described. They can also bring accountability to the performance of controls, illuminate the risk and compliance problems in real time, and get that reporting right away.
Yeah, so I think, thank you, Corey, for bringing the case. I think that university should be looked at as a standout because I think this notion of control performance is one that we're starting to, as an industry, we're starting to get. Yeah. And that idea of, look, if we just push, I hate to even call it enforcement. Nah. If you just give people on the front line of the business a to-do list that is, hey, if you want to do great in your job, please take care of these things that you have to take care of so that we can self-risk manage. Exactly. What a fantastic way to make the employee more effective while also turning risk management into an automated sort of self-managing thing.
Right. And from the frontline lens, you're not asked to do anything that you don't normally do. You're filling out a form. You're not learning some new discipline. You're not learning, having to receive extra training on the thing that you're training to resolve, right? It's keeping your day job.
The coal face of the organization, as it were, all become risk managers without even knowing it.
Absolutely.
We knew they would, Corey.
Excellent.
Thanks for the case today, man.
Thanks, Dan.
Cheers.
Awesome.